The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I seek leave to move the following motion forthwith.
Order.
That this House notes A, before the election, the Prime Minister promised on at least 97 occasions that Australians would receive a $275 cut in their power bills. B, since the election, the Prime Minister has abandoned this promise and refused on 27 occasions to stand by this promise when asked about it in this House, and therefore C, condemns the Prime Minister for cynically and deliberately misleading the Australian people.
Slip granted. I call the order. I call the Leader of the Opposition. Order.
Outrage.
The Minister for Home Affairs. I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I move that so much of sessional and standing orders be suspended as would prevent the Leader of the Opposition from moving the following motion forthwith. That this House notes A, before the election, the Prime Minister promised on at least 97 occasions that Australians would receive a $275 cut in their power bills. B, since the election, the Prime Minister has abandoned this promise and refused on 27 occasions to stand by this promise when asked about it in this House, and therefore C, condemns the Prime Minister for cynically and deliberately misleading the Australian people. Mr Speaker, as late as question time today, the Leader of Government Business, the Minister, Shadow Treasurer, the whole front bench has refused to back in this weak Prime Minister. And this Prime Minister, Mr Speaker, went to an election on integrity and saying to the Australian people he would look them in the eye and that he could be relied upon. And as it turned out, Mr Speaker, he completely deceived the Australian public. And not just on one occasion. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This wasn't a Prime Minister that was in full flight during the course of a press conference and misspoke or moved off his speaking points, as we saw this Prime Minister regularly do in the election campaign. He made that promise on 97 occasions, Mr Speaker. Now, do you think that Australians were listening? Do you think, Mr Speaker, Australians were listening to what the Prime Minister said? I'll bet they were, Mr Speaker, because what he said was based on the research that the Labor Party had done during and up to the election in May. The Australian public wanted to hear from this Prime Minister, the then Leader of the Opposition, that they would get a cut to their electricity prices and to their gas prices if Labor was elected. So what did the machine men of the Labor Party do? They came up, Mr Speaker. They came up, and they are machine men. They're over there. They're over there in that advisor's box, giving the Prime Minister some desperate notes right now. And, Mr Speaker, let me say—
Order. Order.
And, Mr Speaker, they promised $275.
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. Order. The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. Members on my right, I'll hear order. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, there are two rules that have normally been observed by both sides, and there are two groups that we don't target in debate. We don't target people's families and we don't target people's staff.
Order. Members on my right, I'll be heard in silence. I'm just going to ask the Leader of the Opposition to rephrase that part of his response, and I'll give him the call.
Mr Speaker, there were faceless men in the Labor Party who, on research, came up with a line that the Australian public, that they believed the Australian public wanted to hear. And this Prime Minister looked the Australian public in the eye on 97 occasions and told them that they would get a $275 cut to their power bills. 97 times. And do you know what's happened since the election, Mr Speaker? We have given every opportunity to the Prime Minister to repeat that claim, to say to the Australian public, you didn't mishear me during the election campaign. You aren't going crazy. You actually heard it. Yes, you did, on 97 occasions, that Labor in government would reduce power prices by $275. The Prime Minister on 27 occasions now since the election, has been given the opportunity in this parliament to apologise to the Australian people, to say that he made a mistake, to suggest to the Australian people that somehow they misunderstood. That hasn't happened, Mr Speaker, because that decency that the Prime Minister could express, the apology that he should give to the Australian people, completely escapes him. And, Mr Speaker, at a time when families are seeing an increase in their power prices because of Labor Party policies, at a time when Australians are seeing an increase in their gas prices because of Labor Party policies, they are feeling deceived by this Prime Minister. They wanted to believe in him. They wanted to believe that he was sincere. They wanted to understand that he would deliver on a promise that he made solemnly to them on 97 occasions, and there's no chance of it. No chance of it at all, Mr Speaker. And I'll tell you what's happened since the election. The Labor Party has delivered a budget only a month ago. In that budget, the Australian public expected that after 6 or 5 months in government, this government would have come up with a plan to deliver on their election promises. That's what they expected in the budget, not unreasonably either, I might say, Mr Speaker, not unreasonably. What happened in the budget was that Labor said to the Australian public, no $275 cut, no mention of $275 anywhere in the papers associated with the budget. So not only can they not say it in this place, they can't say it in their budget papers. What did the budget papers tell us, Mr Speaker? They were very clear. They were very clear. The budget papers delivered in October said two things, amongst many. Firstly, they said that after 2 years of Labor Party policy, the price of electricity would go up by 56%. No mention of that before the election. Secondly, they said that gas prices after 2 years of Labor policy would go up by 44%. Now, I know that Labor isn't too good when it comes to management of the economy or numbers, but surely it doesn't escape even the Australian Labor Party that a promise of $275 is the complete opposite of delivering a 56% increase. I'll tell you who does get it, Mr Speaker, Australian families, because at the moment they are facing 8% inflation under this Labor government. They are facing increased interest rates. Australian families are coming off fixed interest rates of 1.8%, going up to 4.5%, and interest rates are going north. They are facing huge increases in every line item in their household budget, and we're now getting Australian manufacturers who are talking about moving offshore because they're worried about the instability in the system and they're worried about massive increases well beyond the 56%, well beyond the 44%, Mr Speaker. And to compound the Prime Minister's deception of the Australian people, they have now concocted this argument that somehow the war in Ukraine, the illegal invasion by Russia into Ukraine in February of this year, was what has been the excuse for not delivering the $275. So, Mr Speaker, let's just be very clear about this, because this deception was repeated in question time again today. And I wish I had more time. I wish the government would allow us to have the debate. But let me say this, Mr Speaker. On the 24th of February, Russia invaded the Ukraine. Since that date, the Prime Minister himself has personally promised on 28 occasions to cut power bills by $275. So get that. So somehow today the Prime Minister is saying we can't deliver on the $275 because of Russia going into Ukraine. Yet since Russia has gone into Ukraine, the Prime Minister has repeated on 28 occasions that promise to deliver the $275 price cut. The Australian people aren't stupid, Mr Speaker. They are not stupid. They can see a fake and a phony a mile away. And I'll tell you what, they saw it in Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard. They are seeing this government make critical economic mistakes right now, including significant changes to the industrial relations system, which will come as a wet blanket across the Australian economy at exactly the wrong time. And the Australian public and small businesses get it, Mr Speaker. They know that at the last election they were deceived by this Prime Minister. They thought he was a man whose word he would honour and whose word they could trust. And he has demonstrated to them time after time, before and since the election, that he does not live up to his word. There are 28 occasions, and I'm very happy to table that, Mr Speaker, to go through each and every one of the quotes made on 3AW, made at AFR, made at ABC in Townsville, at a doorstop by the Prime Minister, in Tasmania, at a doorstop by the Prime Minister, on Today Extra by the Prime Minister, ABC News Breakfast, Channel 7 News. And yet this Prime Minister, Mr Speaker, says one thing to the Australian public before an election and then does the complete opposite after. So don't believe a word that this Prime Minister has to say when it comes to electricity prices. Under this government, with the policies that they are delivering, with what they have promised in their budget, your power prices are going up. Your electricity prices are going up. Your gas prices are going up. And I'd say to the Australian public, don't trust this Prime Minister.